Welcome to the Counter Narrative Podcast, a show designed to change the way we talk and think about education. By sharing stories of successes and triumphs, we aim to challenge the dominant narrative that often negatively portrays our disenfranchised populations. I'm your host, Charles Williams, an educator for 15 years, a current school principal in Chicago, and an educational consultant. Let's get started. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Don't believe me? Here's 5 reasons why. First, it's free. Second, there's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. 3, Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and so many more. 4, you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. And 5, it's everything you need to make a podcast, all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. In this episode, I chat with Kwame Sarfo Mensah, a 14-year veteran urban educator and the founder of Identity Talk Consulting, LLC, an independent educational consulting firm that provides professional development and consulting services to K-12 school districts, educators, colleges and universities, and educational nonprofit organizations. He is also the author of 2 books, Shaping the Teacher Identity, 8 Lessons That Will Help Define the Teacher in You, and From Inaction to Inaction, Creating a New Normal for Urban Educators. As a staunch ambassador and advocate for teacher empowerment, Kwame has spoken at numerous national educational conferences and worked diligently to support the recruitment and retention of teachers of color in the education system. In January of 2019, he was selected to be in the inaugural cohort of the Inspired In-Service Professionals Increasing Racial and Ethnic Diversity Fellowship, an initiative organized by the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education for veteran teachers of color to recruit students of color to teach in Massachusetts. As an Inspired Teaching Fellow, Kwame facilitated professional development workshops for aspiring teachers at universities such as Boston College, UMass Boston, and Worcester State University, and has served as a guest speaker for nonprofit teacher pipeline programs such as Generation Teach and Worcester Public Schools Future Teachers Academy. A proud graduate of Temple University, Kwame holds a bachelor's degree in mathematics and a master's degree in elementary education. He was honored as the 2019 National Member of the Year by Black Educators Rock, Inc. for his unwavering commitment to the advancement of the teacher profession. Kwame's work has also been featured in Edutopia, Education Post, WGBH News, The Educators Room LLC, and Medium. During our conversation, we engaged in a controversial, yet needed conversation around the idea that educational systems were not designed for students of color. Kwame discusses the need for teachers to actually begin developing content-rich, culturally responsive lessons so that all of our students are prepared to transition into higher ed or the workplace. He stresses that students of color are often not being developed as critical thinkers and thus contributors to society, but instead being conditioned for compliance and obedience. Kwame suggests taking inventory of our students' talents and developing opportunities for them to tap into that potential as opposed to adhering to narrow definitions of achievement. We also discussed the concept of advocacy and standing up for the students in our care. That is our job, our duty, to recognize our value and worth so that we are not intimidated to speak on behalf of our students when there exists injustice. Enjoy! Hey Kwame, I am so excited to have you on the show. It is a change of pace from when I was with you not too long ago on your own. So excited to have you on the show. So excited to talk to you about changing the narrative around education, But first, tell me, how are things with you? What have you been up to?
Oh man, well, first off, Charles, congratulations on the podcast. It is an honor to be a guest on your platform. And as far as what's been going on since we last spoke, my family moved back to the States just temporarily because of the rise of COVID-19 in Ethiopia. And we've been here for the past couple months, just quarantining and staying safe as we've been told by our government and health officials. So, yeah, we're healthy, we're blessed, and we're just happy to be with each other during this unprecedented time.
Well, I'm glad to hear that things are going well for you. I know the last time we spoke, as you mentioned, you were in Ethiopia. I believe it was like something 2 in the morning. So that's a big change, for
Yeah,
this 2 hour difference now.
a welcoming change indeed.
So Kwame, for those of our listeners who have no idea who you are, can you share a little bit about who you are, what role you have in education, and maybe the journey how you got here?
Sure, I'll try to give the abridged version just for the sake of time. My name is Kwame Sarfo Mensah, and I am currently the owner and founder of Identity Talk Consulting LLC, which is a business that focuses on on professional development for teachers and school leaders in different districts. We like to specialize in the areas of culturally responsive pedagogy, lesson planning, instructional coaching, anything that's going to help enhance the craft of teachers in the classroom. That's what we focus on. As far as my journey personally, I was born here in the States in Springfield, Massachusetts, but I was raised in Connecticut, Bloomfield, Connecticut. Both my parents are from Ghana, West Africa, so I am a first generation immigrant. And, we grew up in a middle class African American neighborhood in Bloomfield, Connecticut. So even though we saw a lot of black people, we also saw people from other cultures, Asians, Latinos, Latinas. We also saw Middle Eastern, pretty much a melting pot of cultures growing up. But then after my sixth grade year, I moved to Ghana with my little sister and father and ended up staying there for 3 years. So during that time, I attended school there. And it was a very pivotal time for me because I was finally learning about my culture. Because up until that point, you only know what your parents tell you. My parents weren't really speaking the native language to me; they were speaking English, and I do believe it's because when they first moved to the states, just like many immigrants do, they feel like what, in order for me to have some upward mobility, I need to be proficient in English speaking.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think they carried that mindset into us and just said, you know what, we want our children to be successful, so as a result, I wasn't fortunate enough to learn my native language, but I'm still blessed to, be in the situation I'm in. As far as education goes, I did attend Temple University in Philadelphia, which is also where I started my teaching career. Spent my first 4 years of teaching in the city, teaching in different charter schools. And then after that, I moved here to Boston, where I taught middle school math for the past 5 years. And that's all before moving to Ethiopia.
Well, so you have been kind of all over the place with lots of experiences, lots of different, I guess, exposures to cultures and language. And do you think that that has played a role in kind of the work that you're doing now?
Oh, man, absolutely. I mean, to go from a place like America where pretty much it's easy to take things for granted as far as resources, as far as having your education being paid for by taxpayers, free reduced lunch, like all these things that are given to us.
Hmm.
They're kind of normative for us because we grew up in this culture. But if you go to developing countries, that's not the case. That's not the case in most countries, actually. I mean, when I went to Ghana, I had to pay for everything. We had to pay school fees. We had to pay for our own textbooks, our own supplies. We didn't have school buses out there. We had to drive ourselves to school. So even if you lived 90 minutes from the school, you had to drive yourself to school and make sure you're there on time. So we, so it's a huge difference, going to school out there and then going to school here in the States. So, I mean, for sure, if I learned anything about my journey, it's the idea of humility, just being humble and just being thankful for the little things that we do have. Because if you go to most countries, they don't have half the stuff that kids have here in the States.
No, absolutely. It reminds me of a story that of a professor of mine that once was hosting a gentleman from another country, and as they were driving to his house, he kind of apologized about the view. He was like, "I know there's really nothing to see. It's just cornfields and so on." And the man looked at him and said, "Are you kidding me?" He said, "I am." Astounded by the amount of food that is just readily available. And the professor talked about, he drove past it every day, just as you said, he just kind of took it for granted. And even sometimes it was an annoyance because that is all he saw. But yet through this other perspective, it was profound of the way, that shift in lenses can change things. So, Kwame, could you talk just a little bit about, I know that you just released a book. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. The name of my new book is called From Inaction to Inaction, Creating a New Normal for Urban Educators. And it's just basically a book that speaks to this concept of activism as it pertains to educators across the nation, urban educators specifically. And in this book, I really stress the importance of us challenging the status quo, the importance of us pretty much going from a state of indifference, a state of despair, a state of hopelessness, and becoming solution oriented and at times even radical in the way that we address the inequities that have existed within our urban school systems for so many generations. So when you look at the word inaction, to be inactive is to not be involved, to be sitting on the bench, if you will.
Hmm. Hmm.
You're just watching the game and just being a spectator. But when you go from that state into a state of inaction, now you've become a verb. Now you're getting off the bench, you're subbing in for somebody who's just not holding up their weight, and you're coming with solutions to help remedy the issues that do exist. So I just wrote that book as a way to really urge educators to, let's do something about what's going on. Now that we're in COVID-19, I think the title is very fitting for what's happening because you've seen a lot of educators do innovative things with online learning. Now I know that there are our population of educators who still need some more support in regards to that, but you have a lot of educators doing some phenomenal things with learning, whether it's creating YouTube channels, whether it's dressing up as different characters just to engage the children. I've seen stories of other educators creating apps to engage their students and other students outside their school, in learning.
Hmm.
This is just a great time to be innovative because who knows how long we're going to be doing remote learning. I don't think the government has quite figured out what that's going to look like. I know that in many states, they're thinking about doing a phase plan in order to reintegrate people, back into society, back into a sense of normalcy. But the reality is, COVID-19 is running rampant, and there's still a lot of questions that need to be answered as far as when is it safe for us to leave our homes and to be back in schools physically.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you saw, and I don't know how relevant this is going to be by the time, this show airs, but, CDC released some guidelines. Did you see those?
I sure did.
It's like, yes, we are going to have desks 6 feet apart. Like, okay, so I have a classroom of what, 10 kids? Like, exactly. Like, what is this going to look like? Nobody has really any idea. But I think you're right. This is a great time for all of us to be innovative and for us to step up and say, how can we be a part of the solution,
Mhm.
as opposed to just kind of sitting back and complaining and all of those things. And so I think that's a perfect segue into really the meat of this, is really that idea of around changing the narrative around education. So, what are some ways that you think that we as educators, or maybe you could even share some stories about things that you've done, how we can change that narrative, that just surrounds education, especially now.
Well, I think it goes back to what I was just saying earlier about this idea of content creation. Now, we've known that the education system was never designed for people of color in the first place. The way it's designed, it's all been designed through a westernized or Eurocentric lens. So when you look at it from that standpoint, this time that we're in with COVID-19 gives us an opportunity to create culturally rich content in a digital platform that's going to be relevant and engage students of color, especially our Black and Brown students, in ways that weren't happening when they were in their own classrooms. So I do believe that in order to change the narrative, we have to look at it from a curricular standpoint. So that goes back to this idea of having culturally responsive pedagogical practices being employed by teachers. That's something that has to be done with fidelity and not just talked about. Because a lot of people have the CRT hashtags or the CRP hashtags,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
next to their names, but for some of those teachers or educators or experts, are they really doing that work, or are they just running around with the buzzword?
You know,
So,
Go ahead.
yeah.
I'm sorry. No, no.
No.
I was just going to say, I'm glad you said it, because it's one of the things that I talk about so much is that idea of beyond hashtags, right? Like,
Mhm.
just stop talking about it and be about it. Start doing the things that you're claiming. Uh, we talk all the time about these people who live, right, like, on Instagram, right? They live these fake lives and post these experiences that they're not real. And I don't think, and maybe this is going to be my controversial episode here, but I don't think that half the teachers that are out there in the Twitterverse and all these other places that are talking about all the things that they believe in and they're doing are actually doing those things. Because if that was the case, as you said earlier, education wasn't designed for certain populations in this country,
Yes.
right? If we've been doing the things that we all say that we're doing, we would be in a vastly different place right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just to further answer your question, it's more than just what has to be done in terms of curriculum. We also have to look at the fact that our students are not coming out of their K to 12 schooling ready to go to college or ready to start a career if they decide to go that route.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this issue of career and college readiness. And also questioning whether the way the curriculum is set up is done in a way that's going to really prepare kids for the real world. Um, I know in my book, I have a chapter called Mic Check 1212, the call for more career development programs in secondary schools. So it's actually named after the rapper Killer Mike, who's based in Atlanta. Very,
Mm-hmm.
very, and you know Killer Mike, very popular rapper, very politically conscious, um, outspoken, and is doing a lot in terms of the social justice realm. But he actually had a show on Netflix called Trigger Warning with Killer Mike.
Oh no, I watched the entire season.
Okay, so you're familiar with, so you know which episode I'm referencing. You have an idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's the, I believe it's the second episode of the
Yeah.
show.
Yeah, I
Yep.
felt really weird because I recommended the show in episode 1 and then I saw episode 2 and I was like, don't get any weird ideas.
All right, but listen, if we get past the pornography analogy, let's get past that, right?
Right, right.
The underlining theme of what he's saying is kids are going to school and they're being taught to be compliant.
Mm-hmm.
They're being taught to listen to what the teacher is saying, the directives of the teacher. It actually goes back to what Paulo Freire says in Pedagogy of the Oppressed about this idea of banking, right? Where the teacher is at the front of the room. They are the people who are disseminating knowledge. They're the experts, and the students are the passive recipients of said knowledge, but they're not really contributing to the dialogue. I guess it's not really a dialogue because the teacher's talking all this time and they're just listening to the teacher and just taking whatever the teacher's saying at face value. That's not education.
No.
That's not how it should be designed. If anything, we need to let our children be the driving force behind their educational journeys. And I can give you some examples of what that can look like. I was just on Instagram a couple days ago, and I came across a young lady who is a small business owner. She is 13 years old.
Mm.
And I even shout her name because I want to make sure people follow her page, right?
Yeah, please do. What is her name?
Her name is Jada Huffman. And she is the owner of I Am Apparel. So she has a clothing line. And the inspiration behind this clothing line is the fact that when she was in school, she wasn't hearing a lot of history about African Americans, Native Americans, people of color.
Mm-hmm.
She wasn't hearing that in the school she was attending. So she said, I'm going to do something about it and create a clothing line that's going to educate my peers on these historical figures. So here's what makes this real special. And you'll see this on her website, right? She sells shirts and other products. Now, on the shirts, right? On the shirts, basically, you have a QR code either on the sleeve part or somewhere on the lower part of the shirt. If you scan it with the accompanying app, you're going to get information about the historical figure that's on the shirt. So she has a shirt for Malcolm X, a shirt for Frida Kahlo, and she's still making more shirts of different figures. 13 years old, Charles, and she's doing this. Now,
Man.
yeah, man. And now tell me, do these kids in general, do any of our children learn this in school as far as this idea of entrepreneurship, being able to leverage the skills that they have as digital natives in Generation Z to monetize on their talents, right? We're not really teaching them, we're not really looking at their inventory
Mm-hmm.
and using it as a way to engage them. We tell kids, put the phones away, put your devices away. But yet, these are the same devices that we're using during this pandemic period to engage students in remote learning. That doesn't make sense to me. Does it make sense to you?
No, I think what you're saying is absolutely true, right? Is that we are trying to hold on to, and I cannot stress this enough, right? Everybody keeps talking about going back to normal. I can't wait for things to get back to normal, and the reality is that we should not go back to what was normal. We need a new normal, and what you're saying is absolutely true. Like, yeah, we sat around and we said, hey, these things are not permitted, those things are not acceptable, and yet now, because we're forced into it, we're saying no, these things are acceptable. So how can we as educators, in all good consciousness and all good faith, go back into the school buildings whenever that may happen and say, okay, those things are that we've been using for the last X number of months, as a tool of education, are no longer tools of education, because we're going back to our old ways of slate tablets and whatever. It's like, I loved what you said. There's take inventory of what our students are coming to the table with, and how can we tap into that 13-year-old proved that they are more than capable if only given the opportunity. And so, I'm sure there are people listening and just saying, hey, I am in the same boat right now, but I'm running into these obstacles, I'm running into these things. Kwame, if you were to give some just real world tips, some takeaways that somebody could walk away with, what would those be, so they could try to do some of the same work in just changing the narrative that we're experiencing?
Now, before I answer that question, I wanted to add one more thing to
Oh,
tie
go
back
ahead,
to
go
your
ahead.
original question. So we talk about career readiness and college readiness, right? Now, also in the book, I have a full chapter on this overage, undercredited
Mm.
student epidemic that is ravaging our urban schools, right? Now, I know you're a teacher at one time, and I know you're an administrator, but you probably have students who are smart as a whistle, extremely bright, but do not want to do any work for their teachers. Does it automatically mean that they're dumb or they're just incapable of performing academically?
Mm-mm.
No. Some people make the conscious decision not to do any work because it simply does not engage them. They simply don't see the relevance that it has in their lives. I've had students tell me, Mrs. Sarfo Mensah, I love you, but don't expect me to do any work this year. They're telling me this in September, and they followed through on this all the way through to June. They fail all their classes, D's and F's, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when it comes time to decide who's going to go to the next grade, we have to make a decision. Well, gee, we can't let 10 people stay back because guess what? We can't have but so many people in a class.
Mm-hmm.
And also we have an incoming class coming up. And we have to leave spots for them, enough spots for them. So you have to choose maybe 2 out of 10 to stay back. So
And if we're going to be honest, don't forget
yeah.
all of those evaluation systems. We got to make sure we look good on paper.
Well, yeah, that too. I mean, and that's something that we can talk about for another day. And at the end of the day, all of us can manipulate our data points. We can all manipulate it because in an average school, your evaluator, which could be a principal or a master teacher, whoever that may be, they're probably going to come to your class maybe I'll say 4 or 5 times a year. Now, I'm not sure how often you do your evaluation with your staff, but just from my experience, I might get maybe 3 or 4 evals a year. And that doesn't include just those informal observations where they just pop in just to watch you for 15, 20 minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I could look good during those 4 evaluations, I'm good for the remaining 176 plus days of the school year.
No, absolutely.
That's how people think, unfortunately. Some teachers think that way. Let me just put up the window dressing for my administrators, but those other days, I'm doing my thing. I'm going to do me because I know they're not looking for me. Unless you have that micromanaging principal that just be all up in your grill and they want to see everything you're doing. They want to see if your standards are posted up. They want to see if you have updated your bulletin boards and put up new student work. We have those school leaders like that. But I think ultimately, when you look at the fact that so many kids are being retained, it's not because they can't do the work. They purposely put themselves in that situation. So what if we gave them license pedagogically, but also if we made some changes in the curriculum to leverage the skills that they already possess and to allow them to have more access to technology, using it in a productive way that's going to push their learning and enrich it to another level. Imagine how that can transform schools. Just simple changes like that. Imagine.
You know, it is not too difficult to imagine because I know, like I said earlier, you know, because I don't want to be a hypocrite. I don't want to be one of these people out there saying what should be done, and then not doing it. Those are many of the same small things, right? And a lot of times that's what this is. They're small, simple changes that can be done. And, you know, those are the things that we put into place in my school. And our school has become revolutionized, right? When I came in, we were on a closing list. You know, now we're at a 2+. You know, we're just doing great things, and it's simply because we've put ownership. We've empowered students, right? Moving beyond engagement, we've empowered students to say, what is it that you want to learn? How do you want to learn it? And right, we take these state standards because I understand those are skills, those are critical, but how do we tie those into what the students want to learn and you know, cultivating it in that way? Because like you said earlier, and I think this is critical, I am a huge proponent of relationships. I preach relationships all the time. But like you said, even relationships alone aren't going to fix that, right? There's this notion that if a kid likes you, they're immediately going to do the work. But if
Mm-hmm.
this work isn't interesting, if this work is not relevant to me, then I'm not going to do it. Like you said, hey, I love you. I'm happy to be in your classroom, but this work is not important to me, so I'm not going to do it. No offense to you, but I'm not going to do it. And so we have to move beyond simply relationships and figure out how can our work, what is the stuff that we're doing in the school, how can it be reflective of our student body?
Well, here's what I'll say. I'm just going to throw a few examples out there, right? Um, the rapper Nas. The rapper Nas dropped out of school in the ninth grade, I believe. Ninth grade. Now look at Nas.
Mm.
Now, not only has he had a successful career in rap music, but now he's an entrepreneur, owns his own record label, and he actually is partnering up with Harvard University for a few projects. And this is someone who didn't even finish K to 12 education.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Diddy dropped out of Howard University after his sophomore year because he realized, guess what? I can actually start my own record label, and we've seen what he's been able to do. And then even with some of the other people, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, the list goes on and on. Mark Zuckerberg. These are people who didn't even finish their college education. They knew exactly what they wanted to do, and they jumped into it, and now they're making millions of dollars, and they're set for life. This can be a reality for our own children, but we have to plant this. We have to give them the seeds. We have to give them the seeds, and that's not what we're doing. And when I say seeds, I'm talking about culturally relevant pedagogical seeds. Something that's going to speak to them in a way that's genuine, in a way that's real. And that's why so many of our kids don't really mess with school because they don't see themselves as some of the people I mentioned, or they feel like they can still get there, but maybe taking a slightly different path. But we've kind of streamlined children to think you have to go to college. But based on the examples I mentioned, you really don't. You have to have a plan, a realistic plan. in order for you to generate some type of income, in order for you to survive, in order for you to provide for your future families, you have to have a plan. And it's going to take work and support from people in your circle. But we don't have these conversations with them because we're so caught up in standardized testing. We're so caught up in all these things that are mandates from the district that, in the end of the day, don't really matter in terms of the lives of our children. Yeah.
I mean, you said it, right? Like,
Yeah.
so much of what we are focused on doesn't really matter. I mean, it's a simple fact. And I know that there are people that believe that. There are people who are probably sitting there listening to us right now, nodding their heads, but we don't talk about it enough. Right? We are afraid because it's almost like it's blasphemy in the field of education to say, hey, maybe the problem isn't, right, the millions of kids who go through our school system every year. Maybe the problem isn't, the culture and society and communities. Maybe the problem resides within us, and we are the ones who need to make some changes. And I know that's hard. I know that's a difficult thing to accept for anybody, to accept that maybe I'm part of the problem, right? But it's not going to be until we as a whole accept that, acknowledge it, that things are going to change. So,
but you know what? You know, Charles, you mentioned something very profound here. Do you know why we don't talk about it enough? Is because I know in my case, I'm a black man in education. If I start opening my mouth and just really saying what I really want to say, you know that segment in the Chappelle Show that says when keeping it real goes wrong.
yeah.
Like, because I'll say something that I know is gonna be a fact, but that could cost me my job. It could cost me my livelihood, and that's how I used to think in my early years in education, because I just wanted to, stay in my lane and still find a way to stay in the game and be there for my kids. So I didn't want to say anything super controversial. I will see things happen and I would just keep my mouth shut because I was afraid of the consequences. But then once you start to realize your value and your worth as an educator, and you realize that, you bring a lot to the table positively, that's when you're able to have the courage to really say what's going on. Obviously, within the professional realm. You're not just gonna go out and insult, your boss. That's not the way. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. But you're definitely going to advocate for yourself and advocate for others who you feel need to be defended, and speak your mind on the issues that are taking place within your school community because you care about the kids. And that's really what it comes down to. It's not about making other people look bad. At the end of the day, this isn't about us. This is about the kids. And if we can keep it at that and keep the kids at the center of what we do, then there aren't going to be any hard feelings when we do have these real, necessary, candid conversations about how we're progressing as a school community.
I hope, I really do hope that at some point that we get to that level. I know that I am engaging in those conversations in various aspects. In CPS, we have our GEM cohorts, we have our equity working groups. Obviously, that was the purpose of creating this podcast, to have these types of conversations with people all across the country and hopefully even beyond that. But just to have some real honest conversations, in what, like you said, this isn't about attacking anyone. This isn't about making anybody look bad. We're just speaking truth, right? And being advocates, not only for our students, but I think, Kwame, with some of the work that you and I are doing and plenty of other individuals out there, we're being advocates for some of those other educators who have not yet found their voice. those educators who are going through these things, and until they find that courage that you talked about to stand up and to have those real conversations, it is our job, those of us who have found that courage, to be advocates.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So Kwame, as we get, as we're beginning to wrap up here, obviously we've talked a lot about, these various aspects, and we're talking about educators who are doing great works, and some who have found the courage, some who haven't found the courage. So do you have any shout outs, anybody out there that you just feel needs to be recognized, for whatever it is that they may be doing? We already have Jada. Jada, I'm going to look into your work as soon as I jump off this episode here. But Kwame, do you have anybody else that you want to give shout outs to?
Oh man, too many people, but there are a few that do come to mind. Shout out to my brother Desmond Williams. He just released a book called The Burning House. It is a phenomenal read. Anybody who is all for advocating for our black boys who are being marginalized in school districts, particularly our urban school districts, please get yourself a copy of the book. It is a necessary read and it should be in your library. So please shout out to Desmond Williams, founder of Nylinka School Solutions. You can check out his work on www.nylinka.org. And then I have two more people. The second person is LaRue Fitch. LaRue Fitch, he is somebody who we're going to be talking about for many years to come. The brother is powerful. He's someone who I met during my time with Black Educators Rock through the different conferences I've attended from the organization. And he is somebody who is doing everything from instructional videos on different content areas on Facebook. He's doing this every Sunday. He's also featuring different educators on his platform and sharing their stories. And then on top of that, he is right now pursuing a doctorate at Chicago State University.
Okay.
And he released a book called Breaking the Education Code, which you can buy right now on his website, LaRueMFitch.com. So that's LARUEM as in man, FITCH.com. Check the brother out. He is doing some great work in the education space, and we need to make sure that he gets recognized and he gets his flowers. And then the last person is Dr. Marquita Blades, who is a great friend of mine. She is based in Georgia, and she specializes in STEM education. So she is a STEM teaching specialist, but also she has her Powerful Strategies podcast, which she started maybe a month ago, and I was actually her first guest on that podcast. But she's somebody who you definitely need to check out. So that's Dr. Marquita Blades, and she is internationally recognized as an education consultant, as a STEM teacher advocate. Man, there's so many things I could say about her, but we'll reserve those for another time.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to learning more about these three people. And what about yourself, Kwame? I know for a fact that people listening to this are now going to want to learn more about you, see the work that you're doing, follow you. So how can people go out and find you?
Yes, for sure. So you can find me on Facebook with my full name, Kwame Sarfo Mensah, or you can go to the business page, Identity Talk Consulting LLC. Either one, you'll be able to find me there. Twitter, my handle is at Identity Shaper. On Instagram, my handle is at Kwam, KWAM _ the _ identity _shaper. And YouTube, I have my channel, which is just my name, Kwame Sarfo Mensah. And that's where you can find videos of episodes of my podcast, I Dare Talk Educators Live, which you can find on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and all other streaming platforms. And you can also find me on LinkedIn by my name, Kwame Sarfo Mensah.
All right. So I appreciate it, man. I cannot thank you enough for being on this show. You know, I had a great time speaking with you, diving into some of those topics that are, you know, always get me fired up. Love talking about, and thank you for everything that you're doing, you know, for educators, for students, and just the amazing impact that you're having on education. Thank you.
Man, thank you, Charles. It was a pleasure chatting with you today. Keep doing what you're doing. Let's keep working for our kids, man.
Absolutely. Take care, guy.
Yes.
I want to thank you for listening to the Counter Narrative Podcast. If you like what you're hearing, please be sure to like and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. You can also follow the show on Twitter at the CN Podcast and the host at _CW Consulting. Take care.